to say. What's your response?
Well, I don't understand what the claim that there's no such thing as biological sex means. And I certainly think it's, let's call it an error, to suggest that there's some sort of scientific consensus about that. I mean, there's biological differences between males and females in animals and human beings at every level of analysis.
Okay, I'm jumping in here, because what about the notion he put forward at the end there, that if you do not refer to people with the pronoun that they prefer to be referred to, that is a form, according to the Human Rights Commission, of discrimination?
It's not just a form of discrimination, it's a form of hate speech. That's why I made the video. I said that we were in danger of placing the refusal to use certain kinds of language into the same category as Holocaust denial, and suggested that maybe that wasn't such a good idea, especially since there's plenty of debate to be had about gender issues in our society, which I also think are also in danger of becoming illegal, and quite rapidly. So it isn't clear to me how long we'll be able to have the talk that we're having right now.
Here are
some. Can I jump in there? Can I jump in there on?
Please.
I think that's a common misconception about Bill C-16, that it's somehow going to make pronoun use into hate speech. If you actually look at the provisions, we're talking about very minor amendments to the criminal code. For example,
they're not minor.
section,
they put it into the hate speech category. They're not minor at all. That's a misstatement.
I agree with you on that point. I think
so.
There's
Don't
a lot
tell
of
me they're minor.
here.
That's not right.
There's a lot of opportunity.
So section.
Opening.
Kyle,
yeah, so Section 318, pardon me, so Section 318 sets out a series of identifiable groups, and we're talking about the clearest of cases, the cases of advocating genocide. And we have a series of groups that are already identified in the code, and all this does is add gender identity and gender expression to the categories that are already identified. And so I think we really have to add some reasonableness to this discussion, actually clearly articulate what the provision does.
Well, let me be a little clear about what some of the problems, what you might be asking for if you want to do this. For example, and Sheldon, bottom of page 3 here, let's put this graphic up. Pronoun misuse may become actionable through the human rights tribunals and the courts, and the remedies: monetary damages, non-financial remedies, for example, ceasing the discriminatory practice or reinstatement to the job, and public interest remedies, for example, changing hiring practices or developing non-discriminatory policies and procedures. Jail time is not one of them. Jordan, you're not going to go to jail if you keep this up. Do you find that reassuring?
What if I don't pay the fine?
Then what?
Then what? And let's talk about the legalities for a minute. As you know, the University of Toronto sent me 2 warning letters, right? And the second one basically asked me to stop talking about this.
Who sent the letters?
The first, it's the administration, fundamentally, the higher-up people in the administration. The last one was the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science. But, you know, it's coming from the top end of the university.
And the letter said, essentially, you must call people by the pronouns they want?
The letters basically said that, and this is paraphrasing, obviously, that as I'm required to abide by the university policies and the Ontario Human Rights Code, and there's a strong implication in the letter by having this discussion that I wasn't doing so, and so they're asking me to stop. And I can tell you also why they're asking me to stop apart from that. The codes as written make the university just as liable for my speech as I am. So not only is there a reasonable possibility that what I'm doing is uttering hate speech now under our law, but the university is legally responsible for that. And so I think they consulted with their lawyers and decided that maybe the claim that I was making in my video was correct. So I don't regard that as trivial, and I think that the lawyer who's discussing this is downplaying the significance of it tremendously.
Could I speak to the campus climate about this? Because I don't agree with why Dr. Peterson has been asked to stop abusing students on campus.
To stop doing what?
Abusing students.
I see.
And other members of our learning community who do deserve respect and do deserve to be able to work and learn and contribute to society in a place where if they are physically assaulted, if they are...
The assault so far came from the social justice warriors who were at this free speech rally, and almost 2 million people have watched those so far.
This is not accurate.
Well, you can look at the videos yourself.
Because people have been making complaints about your behavior.
Yes, I understand that.
Yes.
Yep.
And so we're seeing a greater opportunity for social justice happening that many people won't understand.
Nick, can I be clear on something? You've accused him of abusing students by not using the pronouns they want to be addressed by.
That's how I see it, absolutely.
that is tantamount to abuse in your view.
Absolutely. Many, many global documents, many
How about
organizations.
violence? Is it tantamount to violence?
Yes,
How about
absolutely.
hate speech? Is it tantamount to hate speech?
Yes, of course. It's hate speech
Fine,
to tell
that's-
someone that you won't refer to them as in a way that they that recognizes their humanity and dignity.
Mary, let me get you in on this at this point.
Sure.
You got something you want to say, or can I put a question to you?
Both. Go ahead.
Okay.
For the question.
You're a writer, Mary.
I am.
I know you care about free speech because you're a writer.
Yes.
Does Jordan Peterson have a little place in your heart because he's arguing free speech here?
I think the interesting thing about Jordan and how I feel about his video, and Jordan and I actually had an opportunity to talk at length before I wrote the Walrus article, and he sails really close to things that I think people can relate to. And I think that we all want to have, you know, an open discourse. We want conversations to unfold. We want people to feel like if they have something to say, if they have a question, they can ask it, that they're not going to be censored. But he sails really close and then right past it, and that's where he and I part ways. Because what I don't really understand is when you listen to the video, he piles a lot of things into the basket of using the pronouns that people want. And it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of his anxieties, and he talks about being fearful and anxious in his video, that somehow there's a cabal of trans activists who have so much power that they are going to basically, you know, using the pronouns that people want and capitulating to these demands, sort of pulls out the Jenga, you know, the critical Jenga piece of the Western canon, right? I mean, basically, Jordan is arguing that this is going to create chaos and anarchy, and that it's essentially a Marxist plot that is there to sow violence and there to sow confusion and topple any kind of hierarchy.
Can I just jump in there for a second? Is that an accurate characterization of your
I
view on
listened
this?
really closely to that tape. I think it is.
Is it, in your view, has she accurately characterized where you're coming from?
It's not a transsexual cabal by any stretch of the imagination. Is it a cabal of radical left-wingers? Yes, it's a cabal of radical left-wingers, and they've been active behind and in front of the scenes increasingly over the last 30 years. And my estimation is that departments like Women's Studies have trained between 300,000 and 3 million radical left-wing activists, and they're making...
And they're all underpaid, so don't worry.
Well, they could pick higher-paying occupations if they wanted higher-paying occupations, but...
Because sexism does not exist. Are you kidding me?
Let's not get off topic here, folks.
I
Go
think
ahead,
we're
Mary.
directly on point.
Mary, come on back.
So I think Jordan has conceded that I think I've grasped his concern. At the very least, I've grasped the concern, and that there is a kind of chipping away at order as we come to know it. The other thing that Jordan and I have in common is a real interest in language, and the idea of what can happen when language changes, when it evolves. And, you know, I was thinking, before I came here, I was thinking about, I grew up in the Bronx, and I was born in '61, so I remember very well when we went from Mrs. to Ms., and my father was appalled, and he kept saying Ms., and he thought that was funny, because if you couldn't actually identify somebody as either, particularly a female, as either married or single, then chaos,
the
right?
notion of characterizing a woman independent of her marital
That's
status
right.
was controversial at the
and
time.
apparently very, very confusing. And so I'm reminded of that when the suggestion is made that somehow if we have words that don't fit into something that we're very familiar with and that we've used to date, that chaos will ensue, that everyone will be confused. I don't believe that. There's no evidence of that historically.
I hear you, but there was no law obliging people to use the word
Actually,
Ms.
but there were laws to oblige people to change the way that we referred to black people, for example. You know, there was a time when there were any number of words that we now can only say as letters. Can I say them on TVO? People were called darkies, niggers, coons, in polite company. And that evolved. Those things changed. When I was a teenager, people were still using those words.
So this is a natural evolution in your
This
view?
is a natural evolution, and chaos will not
If it's
ensue.
a natural evolution, then we don't need hate speech law to enforce it.
But we obviously we do, because we can drive social change, and it doesn't all have to lead to chaos, is my point. And I think that, you know, we have seen the flip side of Jordan's argument, I think, has in fact, we do have a historical record of that. So when it was left to others to name people, we lost Indigenous names. I come from, my mother's from Ireland. She was from a generation that finally got to learn her own language again. She couldn't even speak Gaelic to her parents because they hadn't been allowed to speak it. So we know, we've seen the effect when people can't use their own language, when they can't use their own names.
Okay, let me get Jordan to respond to that. A natural evolution of things, Jordan. That's how it's
look,
being described.
Words are tools. Maybe that was one of the great philosophical discoveries of the 20th century. And that means, and people are always looking for new tools to operate in the world. And if you invent a good tool, like a new word, then people will pick it up just as fast as they possibly can. You really see that in English. But the words that are being required now are not good tools, and that's why people aren't using them. And so instead what we have is the use of force, despite the fact that that's being denied. Although we've already established that, at least in the opinion of one of the people on this panel, I'm already guilty of a hate crime, which is what I said I was guilty of when I made that video. Steve, the issue with the law is quite straightforward. The government is requiring us to use certain language. That's not the same as not using certain language. And it's a line, and this is the fundamental issue. This is maybe the fundamental issue. That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake. And it's a mistake that strikes right at the heart of free speech. And the thing about free speech is that it's not the right to criticize your leaders, which is what people usually characterize it as. Is freedom of speech is freedom to engage in the processes that we use to formulate the problems in our society, to generate solutions to them and reach a consensus. It's actually a mechanism. It's not just another value. And you should put constraints on free speech with the most extreme caution, because you interfere with people's ability to think and communicate.
Let me get Theron to weigh in. Theron, you've been hearing the debate here in the studio. Why don't you weigh